This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
We got Daniel OYEFUSI here from ESPN. He's the beat reporter for the Cleveland Browns. Let's jump into one of my big concerns about like the head coach hire, right? Because I think a lot of people got obsessed with names. Yeah. I think I put out there, I'm like, a lot of people who did not know how to pronounce Shieldhouse like a month ago got real upset about not hiring Shieldhouse. And I always make this point when it comes to head coach hires and just like coach hires in general. We don't know a ton about them before they come in here. Even if we think we know a ton, it's like we don't know who's responsible for what on the offensive side of the ball and really who's shining, who's not, which makes it real difficult for me to get super excited over a name here or there. What I try to key in on is like the process of the hire and one, does it make sense? Like you fired a coach for a reason. Does the coach you hire make sense for the reason you fired the last guy, right? Like, is there some kind of continuity there? And two, did the way you arrived to that answer feel functional? Because even if you get the right answer, right? The Browns had Bill Belichick and Nick Saban on the same coaching staff in '95, but the team was in the middle of getting shipped off to Baltimore at that time and becoming the Ravens, and they never made a mark in Cleveland because there wasn't a plan there for them, or ownership wasn't really bought into them. They wanted to go a different direction once they went to Baltimore. Things happen, right? You can have the right people in place. If you don't have people committed to that vision with those guys, it might not work out. I think those things are very important for head coach hires, and they go overlooked at times. And I think that's why I want to focus on with the Cleveland Browns here is like how much of what they did process-wise was sound. And like it's tough with this team because any bit of noise can sound true based on their history, right? Like that, it's like trying to look for smoke in the fog, right? Everything looks like smoke with Cleveland. The Condoleezza Rice thing, right? That was a famous like John Dorsey trying to rat out people who were leaks in the staff, but it turned into people actually believing we were going to interview Condoleezza Rice, right? Even though that was not the intention of it. This is kind of the difficulty of tracking these things with the Browns. How have you been able to kind of track this as somebody else who's also process-oriented? And how do you feel about the process that brought Todd Monken to Cleveland?
Well, I will say this. I think that Andrew Berry was well-intentioned in the way that he wanted to go about this search, because this was his first like true head coaching search where he was kind of at the centerpiece of it and leading it. But I thought that the Browns were kind of like operating an uphill battle when it came to the head coaching search for multiple reasons. One, I just didn't think that it was a very attractive job. And I think we saw that in terms of, how long the process took. The fact that, multiple candidates took their name out. And I think that we can go over the semantics of why Mike McDaniel and Grant Yadinsky and whoever else and Jesse Minter took their name out. We can go over the semantics of it. I think in some cases maybe they weren't really the Browns' number one option. I think in some cases the Browns were the candidates' number one option. But, I do have questions about like how they got to, like, I think nobody, like, they have Todd Monken now and it's like, it is what it is. But like you said, the question is like how they got to that, and whether this was, they're saying publicly, they said publicly after the press conference that he was kind of always the leader in the clubhouse. He stood head and shoulders above them. But I also look back to like what Andrew Berry said about their search for a coach and talking about how I think they were always going to lean offensive minded head coach, because like I don't think that you could go any other way. And I think that ideally they would have liked to, it's very clear they would have liked to pair, an offensive minded coach with Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator. And, they really wanted to focus and devote their resources to a coach who would be able to build up the offense. And just inherently, like, that's going to lead you to an offensive minded coach. But when he talks about like coaches that are going to be different they're going to be different than all the other openings and wanting somebody to grow with this roster, that just kind of like speaks to like a young offensive-minded coach, not a now 60-year-old offensive-minded coach. That's not to say that Todd Monken is going to be a bad coach, a good coach. We don't know. We don't know. The process and what they talked about just seemed to lead you to think that they were going to go maybe a younger route. I know Shieldhouse was, viewed as, the leading candidate at some point, or maybe the leading candidate throughout in the eyes of fans and stuff like that. I know that the cross country trip to LA to interview him and all that stuff and how long it took. I think that a lot of that led people to believe that maybe he was the leader, or that's where people were leaning. But I think one thing that stood out to me was that in most of these cases where the teams conducted their final interviews, the head coach was hired and the deal was signed like within the next 24 hours. Usually it was like 12 hours. Like they wrapped it up pretty quickly. But the Browns, their search extended for another 3 days. I don't know if we'll ever truly know exactly what took place within the time from that last interview to the time that they finally officially, announced Todd Monken as the head coach. But all I can say is, it lends you to believe that there wasn't a consensus at that point. There wasn't a consensus agreement, because if there was, it would have been wrapped up one way or another. If it was Shieldhouse after that interview and everyone was on board, they would have wrapped that up. If it was Monken and everybody was on board, they would have wrapped that up. When you're 24 days in, you got a pretty good sense of all these guys. They've done the first interview, the second interviews. You spend an entire day with them. If you know who your guy is and everybody's on board, or the powers that be that are in charge of all this stuff are on board, that's pretty wrapped up. So I do have questions about the process.
Hey, have you heard of the Sleeper app? It is a place where you can go to play fantasy football. It's also a place you can go to do picks. You can put your knowledge on the line, make some picks, and see who knows ball the most, and maybe even, be rewarded for your knowledge. Go on the Sleeper app. Make sure you sign up using the promo code Worst Take, and you'll get 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code Worst Take. Make sure you check out the Sleeper app.
Yeah. I think because when it comes to hiring a coach, it felt like they were describing somebody different at the beginning of this process than they went with, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing. Like, you might go into it thinking you want one thing, and then you interview some people and you're like, no, actually, I think that's where we want to go. Or maybe you're not blown away by these guys. My big concern is that, there's been a couple of times with Jimmy Haslam where, football ops wanted to go one way. Jimmy's wanted to go another way. Mm-hmm. Do you think the delay was something along that category, or was it just truly they aren't really they weren't at a place where they were really blown away by anybody? Like where do you feel like the nature of that delay kind of took?
Well, it's interesting because Jimmy issued a little correction when somebody was like, what was it about Todd that led you to pick him? He said, I didn't pick him. We picked him. He wanted to quickly squash that notion that it was a Jimmy pick, especially because it's like you hired these people to make these decisions. But obviously the owner has to kind of sign off on it at the end. So I think that there was I'm led to believe and just think just naturally that there was still, I don't want to say some disagreement, but there wasn't an agreement at that point. You know what I'm saying? Because again, if there was a consensus, at the end of that final interview, I think it's wrapped up pretty quickly. And I know people are saying that Todd was maybe a compromise pick. I don't want to go that far, because that leads you to believe that somebody didn't want Todd.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the process and the way it was so drawn out, especially after the final interview, just kind of lead you to believe that there was some type of disagreement that had to get worked out before they officially made that decision to move forward.
Do you think everybody in the building is behind this at this point? Like, or do you think this is something where?
Well, now it's like once you hire the coach, like you have to, but like this notion that Todd was the front runner and the number one choice, and like that, that's not true. I'm just gonna that's not. I know that's not true. That's not true. No candidate is perfect. There were people in the organization that had some reservations about Todd.
Hmm.
for different reasons. Because again, no candidate is perfect. The same way that I know that there were some reservations about Yadinsky and Shieldhouse for obvious reasons, because they
Hmm.
were 30-something-year-old, assistants who didn't have any experience calling plays in the NFL. Like no candidate was perfect. Like there was a blemish on everyone's resume, and there were no perfect candidates. If there were, probably again, it probably would have been wrapped up a lot sooner. So the notion that like if they want to say that Todd was head and shoulders above the rest, sure, fine. I don't believe that, and I know that it wasn't like a everyone in the building was like, "Yep, number one Todd." Like that's just not the case, and it rarely ever is like that. But
It
obviously,
was more of
like
a photo finish.
I could I think that that's a good way to put it. That's a good
Hmm.
way to put it. Where you have the talks, the deliberations, you want everybody to be on board, and then finally, you get to that point. But I think that it's a little disingenuous to say that like Todd was the number one pick amongst everybody in the organization and everyone was completely on board. Because if so, it wouldn't have taken this long. And that's not to say that again, that's not to say that Todd is going to be a bad coach, a good coach. I think there's actually a lot of things to be like excited about if you're a Browns fan when it comes to Todd Monken. It's like even today I was watching his presentations at the Harbaugh Coaching Academy. And this is like a lifetime offensive veteran mind that I think can really raise the floor of this offense. But that doesn't mean that like he's not. That doesn't mean he's a perfect head coach,
Yeah.
by any means. And I think that I don't think he was perceived as that at all.
Do you worry if he's going to be able to get like a full on fair shake as the head coach? Because that's my, when that's like the process is what it is. The Browns aren't a great job to take. You're going to have to make some compromises to be able to find a head coach.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't want to be in a position where I'm worried, like, hey, because Jimmy's not really married, like, not really in love with the guy, or if Andrew's not in love with the guy, that there's going to be some kind of like worry that there's a quick trigger pulled
Well,
on him before he can get going, you know?
I mean, a consistent thing that I've brought up over the past, I mean, really the past year, especially after the real fall off in 2024, was just the feeling that the timelines maybe aren't aligned in terms of management and ownership and to hear Jimmy say that he thought that this team was better than its 5-12 record this past season. It's 8 wins, and I believe that to an extent. But when you fire the head coach, you keep the GM and the front office in place. Um, and you say that like you say that you thought that they were good enough. Like there was a lot of mixed messaging, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like expectations and actual results. Because when you say like the coaching wasn't good enough, but the roster was, you're essentially insinuating that the coaching wasn't good enough, but the roster maybe was good enough. But then you also say in the same press conference that the offense needs a lot of work. So why are you holding it against the offensive minded head coach who won 8 games and 5 of his last season? That's not to say Kevin was without fault and didn't deserve to be fired. But the messaging just at times has been like has been dichotomous. It's been clashing. So I do wonder. It's not so much like maybe Monken getting the fair shake, but I'm like, okay, well, if this roster, if this team doesn't perform maybe to your expectations, and Jimmy even said he was like, I expect us to win a lot more games. All right, well, if you won 5 games this past year, I would
Mm.
assume that if you put them in to win more games, maybe they're competing for a playoff berth, a wild card berth. But the same route, Andrew saying, well, we're gonna have a really, really young team this year. Like that, the messaging
Mm.
is kind of off. So I just wonder, like, all right, well, if the results aren't to ownership standards this next season, all right, well, is the GM and is the front office at risk? And then you're talking about pairing a head coach with a GM that didn't hire him, and not being fully aligned like as you seek. So that's really the main thing for me. I think that like for me the messaging and expectations just haven't really have kind of clashed, and the messaging hasn't been there. And I wonder how Monken gets caught up all up in that if you know Jimmy doesn't see the results that he's expecting.
Do you think this is something that like some of the coaching candidates kind of sniffed out
Oh, most
during
definitely.
during those
Most
interviews?
Absolutely, most definitely. Most definitely. And again, that's why I go back to this was not an attractive
Mm.
opening, and there's just no. I know that they have Miles Garrett. I know they have an elite defense. This was not an attractive head coaching hiring. They handcuffed themselves a bit with, like it's part of the process telling people that you would like to keep the defensive staff in place and, hearing the candidates' thoughts on it, but saying, okay, well, we do like what we have here. So you're kind of you already eliminated yourselves from getting any of the top defensive candidates really
Mm-hmm.
because you wanted to keep Jim Schwartz. You turned off maybe the few candidates who were interested because you said you wanted to keep Jim Schwartz. The bright offensive minded candidates really were probably not taking this job because I mean obviously you have a blank canvas to work with, but this thing is down to the studs like four new offensive linemen. You don't know who the quarterback is. You got to get one, two more playmaker. Like this is like not. It was not an appealing job for a variety of candidates, regardless of their expertise. And I think that again, the GM is definitely on the clock when it comes to building a roster that's ready to win right now. And I think that definitely gave some candidates. I think it gave multiple candidates cause for pause when it came to this opening.
What do you think
I think
Andrew
that I would say
Barry?
I would say one thing, and just to like kind of drive home the point, um, I don't know this for certain, but I have a very good reason to believe that there were candidates that the Browns wanted to interview that they didn't even interview because they were told no, yep, thanks but no thanks. I remember like Chris Shula's name was thrown out there as a guy who the Browns were looking to interview, and then like nothing became of that, and everyone just like nobody really like kind of checked into it, looked into it. Like they were, I'm pretty sure that they were candidates that the Browns like definitely wanted to interview that were like, "Now we're good," because it wasn't appealing to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think Andrew has to do? Well, not Andrew, just Andrew, but like, what does Browns have to do to get to a place to where? Because right now it feels like ownership wants to get involved because they're not happy with the results. What do you think they have to do next season in order to kind of build up some positive equity in football ops so that ownership doesn't really feel the need to get involved and kind of like impose his will?
I would say like, Jimmy was spoke very highly of Andrew Berry after they fired Kevin. Like
Mm-hmm.
he opened his comments with a defense of why he kept Berry in that role, and he talked about the fact that he's done a real good job in terms of building some of this young nucleus and some of the trades they've made and the free agency acquisitions and stuff like that. So I think that there's trust, but like at the same time, it's like, all right, like we trust you, but like, hey, like we got to really start to put this into motion. And obviously, like when you have the draft capital that they have this off season and 10 total picks, some of like the most, I don't, it might be the most draft capital in the NFL this off season. Like there is some real pressure to deliver, especially on offense, where we know that their resources are going to be allocated to. So I think that there's like trust right now in the front office, but there's also the understanding that hey, like you really got to deliver again because we're ready to go. And then again, in ownership's eyes, this was a team last year that was capable of more than 5 wins. They were capable of winning a lot more games than they did. So that's why I say like there's trust, but there's also a bit of an urgency to continue to keep that up with this capital and the resources that they have.